We're down to the final four. It's all number one seeds: Florida, Auburn, Houston, and Duke. Get in on the March Madness action today over at BetOnline.ag. The NHL playoffs are right around the corner. The NBA playoffs as well. Get in on the action today over at BetOnline.ag. Don't forget, you got the NFL draft at the end of April. Head over to BetOnline.ag to get started today. BetOnline, the game starts here. Now, let's get to today's guest. Welcome into Bleav in Steelers. I'm Mark Bergin, joined today by Jeff Hartman with the Steel Curtain Network. And you also might know his work on social media, the Steelers Daily Thoughts. Jeff, welcome in, man.
Hey, it's good to be back, Mark. Thanks for having me on again. I guess I did something right to be invited back.
Yeah, I mean, listen, regardless of the Steelers takes, out at the grill, I always like to see what you've got out there cooking it up for the fam. And it's like that time of year with the weather slowly starting to get to springtime, man. So I hope you're well. And here we are on March the 31st. Free agency started several weeks ago, and we still don't know what's going on with Aaron Rodgers and only having two quarterbacks on the roster. I wanted to open up here of like, why do you think it's taking Rodgers so long to make a decision?
I think that Rodgers is just figuring out what he wants to do in 2025. And when I say that, I don't think it means who does he want to play for. He does not have a lot of suitors anymore. And in his opinion, maybe it's, do I want to play at all? Do I want to retire? Or is he waiting, I don't know, maybe for Minnesota to come back to the table if that's maybe where he wants to go. I think at this point, the Steelers are just patient. They don't need to rush this. You know, Mike Tomlin's down in Florida speaking at the NFL owners meetings, and he said there's no deadline. They got their insurance policy when they signed Mason Rudolph to a 2-year deal. Do fans want to go into 2025 as Mason Rudolph as the QB1? No, I don't think they do. They'd be okay with it, but I don't think they want that. But I think the Steelers are just kind of like saying, hey, take as much time as you want. Go do some dark retreats, whatever you want to do. Get your mind right. Because I think ultimately, and what I've heard from inside the building is they just want him to be dedicated to whatever he signs onto. So if he's a 1-year deal, like they want to make sure he's all in 2025 and not, you know, on that fence of should I retire or should I not?
There's two things I find problematic with this, Jeff. And let me start from Rodgers' standpoint and then from the Steelers' standpoint.
Sure.
When you talk to a lot of players or former players, if they're even contemplating retirement, it's probably already too late. Like if that's already in your background, it's like, whether are you in or you out, you got to be 10 toes in to steal a Mike Tomlin term. So that's number one. The second thing would be, even if the Steelers bring in Aaron Rodgers, to me, that also kicks the can down the road of you're going to be overhauling your quarterback room yet again next offseason. Now, I know you've got Rudolph under a 2-year contract, but you go from Pickett, Rudolph, Trubisky to Fields, Wilson to Kyle Allen, back to Rudolph, maybe Aaron Rodgers, Skylar Thompson, to where what can that be again next year in 2026? And the point is this: the lack of continuity at the quarterback position. I can't find another NFL team that has had that lack of continuity and had real high level of success in the NFL, whether you sign Rodgers or not.
I think when you talk about it from a continuity standpoint, and Mike Tomlin was asked about this down in Florida, and, you know, this is the second year now, actually the third year that they're going to have to kind of overhaul their quarterback room. And he said, look, I understand, you know, he always says 2 is a trend and things like that. He said, if we have to do this again next year, then let me know. And so when you talk about it, when you frame it in that context, I guess in a way, if the Steelers, and this is reported by Tom Pelissero, the NFL Network, and others, that it's a 1-year deal. Okay, if it's a 1-year deal, then you're not going to have a lot of continuity if Rodgers decides to play for the Steelers this year. But if Mason Rudolph were the guy, okay, that's a bridge quarterback now. If you go out and get a rookie in 2026, you draft a quarterback. You have Mason Rudolph, who has a whole year of experience in that Arthur Smith system. That makes sense. Now you have a guy that's been there for a year. He's been in the system. He can not just bridge that gap, but also help educate and help teach. I think there is a lot of value in that. And this is why I keep coming back to the question of, well, what does Aaron Rodgers bring that Mason Rudolph wouldn't? And I think the general consensus from what I've gathered from talking with other fans and people of that nature is that they think it could be like another 2 wins this year. And in 2 wins, maybe Mason Rudolph's ceiling is 9-8. Okay, so if he gets 2 more wins, that puts you in an 11-win team. You're in the playoffs, and who knows? The AFC North is crazy. It's tough. They're trying to win now in 2025, but yet they're still trying to keep an eye on the future. It's a very delicate balance.
I don't think there's any secret that I would rather have Aaron Rodgers, even at the age of 41, than Mason Rudolph. But to me, the question is for what price?
Right. And the financials is huge. Who knows how much he's going to ask for? Russell Wilson gets, 10.3 guaranteed with the option of upwards of 20 plus, but that they'd have to win, I think, all 17 games to get that. So I don't think that's happening. But ultimately, yeah, how much would it cost you financially? What would it cost you in terms of the development of the room and down the road? These are intangibles that we aren't privy to, but it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Do you make anything of Rodgers working out with DK Metcalf over the weekend?
I do. I think that's big. And if you're someone that believes, like you said, you'd be fine with Aaron Rodgers being the quarterback, I think that's huge. He's at least getting a feel for, okay, if I'm going to come into this team, who am I throwing the ball to? He doesn't have a rapport with anyone on the Steelers roster. It's not like Devontae Adams was on the Steelers roster and he goes, well, I know him. I've played with him for all these years. And so he meets with DK Metcalf. They have a throwing session. He might be asking himself, could I see myself throwing bombs to this freak of nature, which is DK Metcalf? Yeah. Would I love to see George Pickens there too? Sure. I guess he wasn't, but still, I think that's big news. I think that's Aaron Rodgers putting a step forward of I might be more interested than I'm letting on.
From the outside, I would think that two beasts on the outside with Pickens and Metcalf would be pretty appealing to any quarterback. Now, I know Pickens is going into the final year of his rookie deal, but you could franchise tag him next offseason. So you'd have two beasts on the outside for at least the next 2 years, potentially. I think that would be tremendously appealing to Rodgers or another quarterback, say, next offseason. So there's that. You mentioned Minnesota getting back into the mix potentially, and it looks like at this moment in time, they'll roll with J.J. McCarthy. Do you think there's any other mystery team out there that would be in need of Aaron Rodgers' services?
At this juncture, no, I don't. It's really just those two teams when you think about it. The Steelers, you have Mason Rudolph, that's it. And in Minnesota, J.J. McCarthy, it's not just that he's going into year 2. He had 0 repetitions as a rookie because of his meniscus tear. So he wasn't even standing, literally. He wasn't even allowed to walk around until towards the end of the season. So this guy got no physical repetitions. Knowing a lot of Minnesota fans at Fans First Sports Network and the people that do their work for us, they're all in on J.J. McCarthy, but there is some hesitancy. And I think the difference to me, that line of demarcation is that Minnesota has built a roster that, in my opinion, is ready to win now. Like right now, you won 14 games last season. Pittsburgh, I don't think they're there yet. I really don't. And so I'm actually surprised that Minnesota is not going down that road with Aaron Rodgers and seeing what it would take to bring him in based on the fact that he is a guy that if he's surrounded by a really good offensive line that can protect him, he has good receiving options, which they do in Minnesota. I'm actually shocked that Minnesota is not vying for his services more than they are. Maybe they are, and they're just not letting that out there. And they're just kind of, I don't know, playing possum, so to speak.
Yeah. And it's crazy the parallels he's had with Brett Favre too, just at this stage in their career. It's like time is a flat circle with all of this.
I don't know, but the Favre comparison, when you look at it, like if he would have gone to Minnesota, like I don't know what he's doing, but still, I don't know a lot of things that Aaron Rodgers does.
So I can't help but wonder if he is just waiting for maybe an injury with another team. I think it was Colin Cowherd say this, and I know he riles up the Steelers fan base, but I actually thought this was a pretty smart analysis on his point. He is of the belief that Rodgers would like to go back home to California and potentially play for the 49ers. Now, the logic here would be if Brock Purdy wants to get out ahead of when he'll be a free agent next offseason. So why would he want to do that? 49ers had a fire sale this offseason. They got rid of a lot of their key players that have been difference makers for the last several years, both offensively and defensively. So if Purdy says, well, I want to either be in a situation or make sure I get my big contract now versus rolling the dice and seeing what he does in the final year of his contract with a team that's been decimated this offseason, could he either potentially force a trade out of San Francisco, and then that would potentially create an opening? I think that would maybe be a possibility, or I hate saying injury, but that's an inevitability in this sport of Rodgers says, hey, I'll wait till a team has an injury at the quarterback position, say in training camp or the preseason, and then go to some sort of contender there, some sort of team that could potentially have playoff aspirations. Those are the only two things, because it's like, he's not going to go to Cleveland. It's an even worse situation than Pittsburgh. Right. He's not going to go to the Saints. They already have Derek Carr. So, like, I'm not seeing anyone else now that the dust has settled somewhat in free agency. So the thing that, like, just doesn't make sense for me with Rodgers is why it's taken this long to make a decision, unless he's seriously contemplating retirement. And I don't think that's the case, Jeff. That's just my opinion.
The 49ers scenario, I've heard that as well. I guess my question would be that unless San Francisco doesn't think that Brock Purdy is the long-term answer, you have a quarterback, though. You would. Yeah. Brock Purdy has won you games, has gotten you to a Super Bowl. If you surround him by talent, he's proven that in that Shanahan system, he can win football games. That is better than more than half the NFL teams can say right now as it pertains to the quarterback position. If they were to trade Purdy and bring in Rodgers, I think that would be one of the dumbest things they could do. But they've done a lot of dumb things this offseason, and they've done a lot of dumb things last season in terms of the Brandon Ayuk contract, which they're now saddled with and potentially trying to get out from underneath. The injury thing, and again, I agree with maybe Rodgers wants to wait and see what happens in terms of the injury front. Everything that we've heard so far in this whole ordeal is that Aaron Rodgers wants to make sure that he is comfortable with the setting that he would be in. Who's his coordinator? Who's his coach? What's the organization like? For him to just jump into a situation, let's just say Dallas. Let's say Dak Prescott gets hurt. And okay, let's go to the Cowboys. Is that really where he wants to go with that ownership, with that coaching staff? That would be a really knee-jerk reaction, in my opinion. Aaron Rodgers, if anything, seems very calculated in what he does. I would be shocked. I just think that what we're doing is we're narrowing down that it literally is probably 2 opportunities this year, if any at all.
The upside and the glass half full perspective to me would be this: like, coming off the Achilles from 2 years ago, it usually takes a player, not that first season back, but the next season back. So if you're saying, like, I think Aaron Rodgers is the answer, like, that would potentially be the argument there. But I really think that Tom Brady and LeBron James have spoiled us of saying, oh yeah, athletes can play well into their 40s now. And I just don't believe that to be the case for the vast majority of athletes.
No, the quarterback position and defensive line are like the 2 positions, though, that if you want to play into, closer to 40, you can still do so. But you need a lot of help. I mean, the Cam Haywards are rare. The Calais Campbells are rare. I would even say, Tom Brady, we know that's rarefied air, and that guy took very good care of himself. Aaron Rodgers does take very good care of himself. People laugh at some of his methods and his thoughts, and that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion, just like he's entitled to his. But he does take good care of himself. And so the question is, I think there's a lot of Aaron Rodgers. And look, these professional athletes are egotistical, especially the quarterback position. They love the cameras on them. They love the spotlight. I don't think he wants to go out like this. I don't think he wants the last 2 years of his career to be him flubbing it up in New York. He played like 4 snaps in 2023, ruptures his Achilles tendon, and then had a pretty crappy year last year in 2024. I think he wants to come back, but I think he wants to come back with a chance to win a championship. And that's where people ask, is Pittsburgh that place? That's a tough ask for me at this stage.
Yeah, I agree. The date I have circled on my calendar, again, we're recording this on March the 31st, so a lot could happen. I'm cursing myself here, Jeff, in terms of when he could potentially make a decision, but April the 9th. And the reason I say that, the Pat McAfee show will be at PPG Paints Arena in Pittsburgh. So potentially announcing it live on the show with all the fanfare of that McAfee show being in Pittsburgh, I think that's a possibility. We'll see, though. Like, the fact that it's dragged out as long as it has and the way that it shook out the way that it has is surprising. I mean, I was surprised and shocked last offseason, too, when the Steelers brought in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. And here we are a year later where it's like, here we go again with overhauling the quarterback room.
Well, and Tomlin saying down in Florida that he's he has no deadline that until they get to training camp, there's really no need. I understand what he's saying, that the need, we're talking about need and not want, is not until training camp, but you cannot tell me that you're going to go into the draft and
Agreed.
say,
Agreed.
are we going to need to draft a guy at some point? I'm not saying that they take him at 21. I'm not saying that they trade up to draft a quarterback or anything like that, but are you going to get a Tyler Shuck in the late rounds because you still need a quarterback to round out your room? Or do you not, because Aaron Rodgers is going to be on the roster and therefore you don't need it because you would have Rodgers, Rudolph, and then we would assume Skylar Thompson would round out the room. I don't buy what Mike Tomlin's selling in that regard. But then again, I haven't in a while.
There's some PR gamesmanship there. And I think that goes back to when Cam Hayward was saying, if you want to be a Steeler, you'll be a Steeler. The week later, a few days later, he goes on NFL Network saying, oh, it'd be cool to have Aaron Rodgers on our team. So it's like, I think there's some gamesmanship with that. I'm with you, though. I'm with you, though, in terms of you can't just say, oh, well, we can continue to kick that can down the road as we get closer and closer to the end of April when you have to make a decision. And that's a perfect segue, Jeff, of, okay, if not Rodgers, what other options do you think that Pittsburgh has at the quarterback position?
There's an option out there that scares me to death as a fan. And I'm fine with Aaron Rodgers. It's not going to hurt him at all. Financially, it will. You're going to have to pay the guy. But other than that, down the road, there's no long-term ramifications from signing Aaron Rodgers. The other option that I'm hearing, and I actually probably would put more stock into this than I would like, is a potential trade for Kirk Cousins. Because exactly. Lord. That's exactly. Oh, gosh. That's exactly what it'd be. You know, he can waive his no trade clause. He wants to go somewhere where he could actually be the starter. Pittsburgh would check both of those boxes. Cleveland's another team I've heard attached to Kirk Cousins that they might be interested in trading for him. I wouldn't want to give up what it would take for the Falcons to actually get him. I wouldn't want to give up high draft capital. I wouldn't want to take on that contract. That's why for me, when I've heard that, and it, because you know Mike Tomlin and how he likes to do things and who he likes to bring in, proven commodities, he would be interested in a Kirk Cousins, but at what price? That would scare me to death. So that option, I know it's probably out there. I know people have floated that option out there. Other than that, you're talking about, in my opinion, a mid-round quarterback. Maybe if people want to take a flyer on a guy, them not having a second-round pick, I think eliminates them from the Jalen Milroe sweepstakes. I think someone will take a shot at Jalen Milroe probably in round 2. I don't think they would want to trade up to get him. He's a project. And so now you're talking about the Will Howards, the Tyler Shuck that I mentioned already, Quinn Ewers, which I heard the Steelers are very high on him coming out of Texas. You're looking at that type of player to come in and you have them on a 4-year deal and their rookie contract. And you're thinking at the worst case scenario, it's our backup moving forward. And that's something fans would have to understand. This, if they were to take a Will Howard in round 3, people would be pissed, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that Will Howard is a 3rd-round pick as your future starter. He could be just a quarterback that's going to be on the roster. Think about and Steeler fans that have been following this team for a while, think about your Dennis Dixons, think about your Brian St. Pierre's, and of course, think about your Charlie Batches out there that you never had any hope for them to be a starter, but they could fill in if you needed to quality backup. Those still have value. Other than that, like you're talking about free agent options, there really aren't any. You're talking Joe Flacco. I'm going to pass. I'm going to take a hard pass there. I mean, there's really not a lot of options for the Steelers other than Aaron Rodgers outside of the NFL draft. If the Steelers do trade for Kirk Cousins, you're telling your fan base, we're going to continue with the same old, and that's the lack of playoff success. And then you might be saying, well, Mark, isn't the same true if Mason Rudolph's your quarterback? The difference is their salaries. Right. The difference is their salaries to where you can load up a team around Mason Rudolph. You know, they went 8-8 in 2019 when he wasn't very good. I think he's a much better player than he was back then. I think he's developed. But Cousins, to me, would just be the question I would have is just why that'd make the least sense. I'm fine drafting and developing a quarterback, one of the players that you named, and then doing the same thing again next offseason. And don't let you swung and missed on Kenny Pickett. Don't let that prevent you from your next at bat and the approach that you've got to take. And I know the draft's in Pittsburgh next year as well.
A lot of fanfare there, whether it's Arch Manning or Drew Allar or one of the other next stud quarterbacks that will be in next year's drafts. But the guy that the Steelers are looking for isn't going to be there at 21. And then so maybe you strike gold and you can draft and develop somebody, but don't let that prevent you from having that trepidation of trying to draft and develop a quarterback. And one other thought I had too, Jeff, too, is you mentioned Jalen Milroe, 4.37, everyone falls in love. And I think that the comparisons to Lamar Jackson are lazy, point blank. If you actually look at their on-field production, if you look at the tape, I mean, 5 touchdowns in SEC play, he had 10 interceptions. And yeah, I know he can bust it loose, but the yards per carry wasn't anything that Lamar Jackson had when he was at Louisville compared to Milroe playing in the SEC at Alabama. Project, I think, is the perfect word, where if he goes to the right organization that can develop him as a quarterback, potentially he could be a capable starter. What about the Steelers has demonstrated their ability to do that now for years? If we're being real open and honest about that.
Well, not only that, if you take the people within the organization, and that it goes all the way up to Art Rooney II for their word, what did he say this past offseason? We would like to have a quarterback room that is of similar skill set. We would want quarterbacks that are, think about last year, Russell Wilson, pocket passer. He likes to scramble around, make plays, but he's not a runner. Justin Fields, he's a runner. You would want to build a system around his running ability. He's an athlete. Not that Russell Wilson's not, but you get my picture. Mm-hmm. So they have Mason Rudolph. If you drafted Jalen Milroe, you would basically be having a gadget player that it would be akin to when Cordell Stewart was in the Pittsburgh way back in the 90s. And yes, they tried to turn Cordell Stewart into a pocket passer and more of a traditional quarterback, and that didn't work out. He would have to go. This is Milroe we're talking about now. He'd have to go to a place that is willing to build everything around him and his skill set. And like you said, I don't think Pittsburgh's that place. I don't think Arthur Smith is that type of coordinator. I don't think Mike Tomlin's that type of coach. So therefore, I'm not touching Jalen Milroe, even if Colin Cowherd says they should trade up in the first round to get him.
Yeah, and along those same lines, I think Jackson Dart's going to go higher than you'd anticipate. And I know there's a lot of people thinking that Shedeur Sanders could potentially slide. I don't see Shedeur sliding past number 6 when the Raiders pick, given his relationship with Tom Brady, which dates back to when Shedeur was in high school. So we know Cam Ward's going to be the number 1 off the board. Shedeur, my point is this: Shedeur, Jackson Dart, they're going to go sooner than we anticipate because of the need for premium play at the quarterback position from other needs.
I see 3 quarterbacks going in the top 15. So that would be Ward, obviously, Shedeur Sanders, and Jackson Dart. And so I don't think there's any other quarterbacks that are on that fringe. Think about a Michael Penix Jr. last year in 2024, who he got drafted way higher than everyone thought. Most had him at a late first round grade. He goes in the top 15 or 16, I believe, to Atlanta. No one saw that coming. I don't think after those 3 quarterbacks that there's a quarterback that would sneak into the top 20 picks. Maybe at the very tail end, if someone loves a Jalen Milroe, as for an example. I think those are your 3 guys, and they're always going to be overdrafted because, again, in the NFL right now, there's such discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots in this league. And what is it all based on? Do you have a quarterback? And if the answer is no, you are a have-not. Those type of teams don't exist anymore. When you're talking about the teams that have a crappy quarterback, but their defense is really good, the 2000 Baltimore Ravens, that doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, I think this is going to be, it's always a quarterback frenzy in the top 15. I think 3 go, and that's going to bump some really talented players down the board, which could make maybe interesting moves for the Steelers in a trade up scenario. Trade down, we'll see how that unfolds.
All right. So the Steelers have the 21st pick. Kenneth Grant, Derek Harmon. Is there a name, Jeff, that you like for Pittsburgh at 21?
See, again, when I think about this, and people have asked me this question a bunch, there's so many different factors that can happen before the Steelers select that is going to change everything. It does every year. And I would love to see them double dip in this draft at defensive line. So let's say they end up getting a Harmon, for example. Okay, he has a specific skill set. Let's double dip and get another defensive lineman. Maybe it's a bigger body that you can kind of plug in the middle. You can have him in that 3-4 nose tackle position. They can plug up a lot of gaps and really help to stop the run. I'm fine with that. But they're going to probably draft a wide receiver. George Pickens is on the last year of his deal. And yes, you made a great point that they could franchise tag him, but do they want to put that much money into him and at the position? Maybe they draft. There's a lot of players that they've been attached to in terms of receivers out there. Who knows? You assume they're going to draft a running back. Jalen Warren, Kenny G, Kenneth Gainwell. They're good. I like it. I want a third. So this is a very deep running back class. And then you talk about, I still would like them to see cornerback be addressed, like a slot cornerback. You're running out of picks at this point. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the Steelers approach this. I also am really curious. You talk about the 21st pick. Do they actually pick at 21? That is a very interesting proposition for me. Do they trade back and try to garner another pick later in the draft? Do they trade up? That's something that no one is talking about. I think more people should be talking about this. Talk to the people that are in the know in terms of really following these draft classes. What do they say? This is a super top heavy draft class. Yes, there are deep position groups at running back and defensive line, but this is a very top heavy draft. So if you find a guy that's floating around 12, 13, and you want that guy, and he could be a Steeler for the next 10 years at a position of need, why wouldn't you go get him? Why wouldn't you trade up to get him? And they say, well, I don't want to give up draft capital. You are stockpiling picks in 2026. Go get your guy. Go get that difference maker. So I'm really curious how this is going to unfold.
Potentially trading back because remember, the Steelers don't have the second round pick in the trade for DK Metcalf. The moment they traded for Metcalf and then signed him to a long-term deal, to me, the writing was on the wall right there of George Pickens' days are numbered in Pittsburgh, whether they franchise tag him or not, because the money they're allocating to DK Metcalf for a true alpha number one receiver, you can't pay everybody. And I say this because, okay, well, Mark, we want to bring George Pickens back. Okay, are you just going to let TJ Watt walk in free agency? Myles Garrett's making $40 million per year. It's going to be around that same type of figure if you keep Watt in a Steelers uniform. So, I know everyone's going to be like, well, the Bengals just did this with T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Joe Burrow. What's their defense going to look like? So these are all things to consider. I think the Steelers absolutely have to draft a receiver to get more depth at that position. I like the top two guys they've got in DK and Pickens, but this last year it was Pickens in everybody else. There was a lot to be desired from that receiver room. The money that you're allocating to Metcalf, you're not going to also be able to do the same thing with Pickens, regardless of how productive he is this season.
And people forget that a TJ Watt extension, let's say it's a 3-year extension. So they would have him for 2025, 3 years after that. He would be in his mid-30s at that point. You can give him the money that would make him a top tier pass rusher, but it could actually lessen the cap hit in 2025. So you could actually create a little bit of cap freedom and space for yourself. And if there's anyone I trust in that regard, it's Omar Khan. He knows how to crunch the numbers. He knows how to make these contracts fit. And so I think that if it were me, I would try and get out ahead of the Dallas Cowboys and Micah Parsons negotiations. I would want to get out ahead of the Cincinnati Bengals and Trey Hendrickson, who they're supposedly going to be in. They're already talking about new contract for him. Get out ahead of these contracts. Don't wait and be reactionary. You've already missed the boat with Myles Garrett getting the bag. You've missed the boat with other players getting the bag. Go out and
Max
try
Crosby.
to Max Crosby. So be proactive. Get out there. Give TJ Watt a deal that's fair, that is comparable, and let's move on with one less question heading into off-season workouts and training camp.
I don't think it's ever a bad idea to keep your face of the franchise and your best player under contract.
Yeah. People will say, well, pass rushers after 30, their productivity drops. Okay. TJ Watt's down years are better than most pass rushers' good years. So if they can scheme him up a little bit more, I don't think the productivity is necessarily going to dip. You can't just say, TJ, you're on the left side. You got to go through 3 guys. Go get them. You got to be a little bit more schematically sound. Say, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this. We're going to move TJ here. He's athletic enough to do some of the things that Myles Garrett, Max Crosby, and Micah Parsons do. So do it. That's what I would want to see the Steelers do. Not sure they will, but that's what I would like to see them do.
They flipped him around a little bit to go up against left tackles this year, a little bit more than I've seen in
Very little
previous
bit.
seasons. But
Very little
yeah,
bit.
it wasn't. You're exactly
Tiny.
right, and it's not how Dallas uses Parsons or how Cleveland uses Myles Garrett. Where the analogy I'd make is it's almost like in basketball, where the ball handler
Mhm.
will get a pick and roll to get screened
Yep.
onto a weaker defender. That's essentially what Pittsburgh has to do: is who's the rookie lineman, who's the undrafted player, who has no experience, and then hey, it's mano a mano against TJ Watt. And it also, if you scheme it up, can help better create one-on-one opportunities for Watt versus if you know he's going up against the right tackle on every single play, you can chip, you can have a tight end, you can have a running back. Like there's ways to scheme around that if you know where he's going to line up on any given play. If you're moving him around, well, you can't scheme on the fly a lot of times.
Right. Yeah, and go back to when TJ Watt tied the NFL sack record. Keith Butler was still on staff. Keith Butler was a genius with scheming up TJ Watt. If I'm Mike Tomlin, I'm going back and watching that film and I'm saying to Terrell Austin, whoever's in charge of the pass rush, Carl Dunbar, whoever it is, we need to get back to doing some of this. Now, Stephon Tuitt was there at that time, and he was a monster that could help free up some one-on-ones for TJ Watt. So maybe you need to draft a player that's kind of like that skill set, or maybe it's Keanu Benton. Okay, then put him over there and let him do that and stop trying to call him a nose tackle because that's really not what he is in today's modern NFL. They have to think about how they're approaching Watt because what it's been the last 2 or 3 years has been just be a better athlete than the person across from you. And now offenses are dedicating 3 players to stopping him, as they should. But where's your counter move? We always say chess versus checkers, right? So they make a move. You have to counter that with something. And so far, the Steelers have not been able to do that.
Yeah, that's well said. And that's why I mentioned Kenneth Grant, kind of the Casey Hampton style with the bigger guy up front, nose tackle, 0 technique, 1 technique. Harmon, I think, has the ability to do that like Benton. But if you draft Harmon, then maybe you kick out Benton to that defensive end in your 3-4 technique. I could talk to you about all of this until sundown, Jeff. Before I let you out of here, I wanted to ask you about, we're into the Final Four.
Sure.
Is there a best Steelers basketball player? Final Four of March Madness. This got my creative juices flowing. Past, present, you can take this in any direction. But from your time covering the Steelers, who do you think of when you said, hey, we're going to lace it up on the hardwood? Which Steelers player would you pick?
Well, past, I'd probably go. I actually know if you read Jim Wexell's his biography on Troy Polamalu was a pretty good ball player. He actually, I think he was, he could dunk and he's not a big dude. The guy is just an athletic freak. He's a Hall of Famer for crying out loud. In terms of current players, when I saw Broderick Jones dunking in the videos, like before he was drafted out of Georgia, put him on the post and show me someone that's going to stop Broderick Jones. Like, it's going to be like Shaquille O'Neal-esque. The dude is really athletic. Like, he's young. He can still move. People think offensive lineman and offensive tackle. Broderick Jones, give me him down low. Just feed it to the big man. He's going to back you down. And then, hey, easy buckets. That's where I would go.
Can you imagine taking a charge from Broderick Jones?
No, I'd be in the hospital.
He is Jeff Hartman from the Steel Curtain Network. Jeff, if there's anything you need to plug, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so you can check me out on Twitter at jhartman, HARTMAN_PIT. You can also check out all of my work at the Steel Curtain Network at steelcurtainnetwork.com is our website. I do a lot of writing there. Anywhere we get your podcast, search Steel Curtain Network, you'll find us. My Let's Ride podcast, which Mark has been on. Hopefully have him on again soon, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning.
Thank you to Jeff Hartman. I'm Mark Bergin. I want to also thank today's presenting sponsor, BetOnline.ag. Wherever you listen to the Bleav in Steelers show, leave us a 5-star review. And on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Again, my name is Mark Bergin. Thank you to Jeff Hartman. I will see you next time. Until then, take care. So long, everybody.